Welcome to today's session, everyone.
We are Pre-Med CC, a student-led organization established in the fall of 2021.
Our goal as an organization was to create an online program for pre-medical students at community colleges and universities, with the hope of guiding the next generation of diverse and inclusive physicians.
And while we advertise our organization as being for community college students, our events are open to anyone.
We realize that finding guidance and mentorship in a pre-med journey can be especially challenging for first-generation pre-med students,
people that lack the financial resources, or just those who do not know people in the medical field.
One of the best parts about our events is that they are virtual, so you can do it from the comfort of your own home.
We typically have events on Fridays from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12:30 Pacific Standard Time.
If you aren't able to attend the event, all of our sessions are uploaded on our YouTube channel.
Many of our sessions will end up with a Q&A with the speakers.
Any questions that you have, you may put it in the Q&A session on Zoom, and our team members will read them and have them answer.
After you have attended our event, you can log into our website and complete the quiz, which will contain questions pertaining to our session today.
If you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you will be awarded a certificate to show that you attended our session today.
If you want to stay connected with the upcoming events or just want to tell your pre-med friends about the Pre-Med CC, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok as @PreMedCC.
So now, after our introduction, I'd like to introduce our guest for this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Lindia Willies-Jacobo came to Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine from the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine, where she had been on faculty since 1996. She served as professor of pediatrics and for 10 years served as the assistant dean for diversity and community partnerships and director of the program in medical education health equity. Her scholarly interests include healthcare workforce diversity, cultural humility in the practice of medicine, advocacy for underserved populations, and combating health inequities. And at Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine, Dr. Willies-Jacobo leads and manages the Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine admissions process from initial outreach to matriculation. So thank you again for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for that very, very kind introduction. Hello, everyone. It truly is a privilege to be here to provide you with a bit of an update on the admissions process, or talk through the admissions process at our school. And so I do hope that you get some value from this presentation and that you kind of ask as many questions as you would like. That's what this time is for. I serve currently as the Senior Associate Dean for Admissions and Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity at the school. I'm also a professor of clinical science. I currently teach primarily in our doctoring course for first-year medical students. So again, a true privilege to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So I always try to begin by sharing with folks where our school is located. We are in Pasadena, California, which is a small community, a little bit east of downtown Los Angeles. And we are located right at the corner of Los Robles and Green Street is the name of the street. And I think it's called Green Street because there are a lot of wonderfully green trees on that particular street. So I think we have a link here, and we will certainly provide you all with this presentation so that you can kind of go into the website and take a look at the tour. We do have a virtual tour of the school. So I always like to talk about this school by starting with the mission and vision of the school. I think it's one of the things that drew me to Kaiser Permanente Bernard J. Tyson School of Medicine. I would like to start with the vision and just discuss a little bit about the areas that really spoke to me. And I think for me, it was this concept of graduating a diverse community of compassionate healers, lifelong learners, and courageous leaders of change within the profession and in society. I think when we are out recruiting students, one of the things we're looking for are students who really at the core believe that the status quo is not okay, and they are willing to engage in that change. And then likewise, when we talk about the mission of the school, I think we sometimes forget that medicine at its very core is a profession of service. So not only do our medical students have opportunities to engage in service co-curricularly and extracurricularly, but we do have service learning opportunities embedded into the curriculum itself. And then just a little bit more detail about our school. This photo was actually taken on July 26th of 2020. So if you remember 2020, we were in the heart of the pandemic. It had just begun. And one of the things our dean, Dr. Mark Schuster, who I will virtually introduce you to on the slides in a little bit, he's standing right here. One of the things he often points out is that our school, as a brand new school, was ready for a lot of different things, but I do not think any of us anticipated a pandemic upon us. But you'll note in this photo, this was the day before the first day of our inaugural class starting school. We're all masked, we're all distanced, but we did manage that year to remain in person throughout the entirety of the year. So we are wrapping up our fourth cycle of admissions. We aim to matriculate around 50 students per class. And some of the things that makes our school distinct include our students training in Kaiser Permanente's integrated health system. And what an integrated health system means is if you go to the physician because you sprained your ankle, chances are that particular physician will ask you if all your immunizations are up to date. So you can get a lot of your care, not only on the same day you present to the doctor, but under the exact same roof. It doesn't require a whole lot of approvals and third-party intervention, et cetera. So that's been, I think, a really nice system for our students to learn and be a part of. And then likewise, our students will be supported in exploring any field they would like to be a part of. I think when we opened our school, and in fact, when a lot of the media about our school came out, there was this assumption that we were training students who had to become primary care doctors. And I think although we know that there is and will continue, we think, to be a primary care physician shortage for quite some time, we do want to ensure that our students have exposure to a pretty wide range of specialties, and that anything they choose to go into, they will be supported in. And we do want our students to take kind of this integrated healthcare model with them across the country. One last area I did want to highlight, just as I think there was this misconception about the school training doctors only to solely to become primary care doctors, there was also an assumption that we were a pipeline to Kaiser Permanente's residency training programs and ultimately Kaiser Permanente. We do believe that many of our students will want to remain in the Kaiser Permanente system, but that is by no means a requirement of our medical school. Just a bit about the demographics of our school, and we matriculate students who have a mean age of about 24 years old. We're asked a lot whether we have any preferences for in-state students, and we're actually a national school. We exist as Kaiser Permanente across 8 different regions, so we don't really have a preference for in-state or out-of-state students. 53%, and I should point out this is not matriculant data, this is data for all classes of students, so 3 classes of students currently enrolled at the school. So a little over half of our students self-identify as women, 41% are students who are underrepresented in medicine. A little under a third are students from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, and then about 18% are first-generation students. I had to do a lot of homework when I came to Kaiser Permanente. I had spent 30 years at UC San Diego School of Medicine. So I've learned that we've been around for quite some time. We were founded in 1945 by Henry J. Kaiser and Sidney Garfield, and we happen to be one of the nation's largest not-for-profit integrated healthcare systems. I think the Mayo is the other. We serve more than 12.2 million members, 12.2 million patients. They're called members in the Kaiser Permanente system. And as I mentioned earlier, we do exist in 8 different regions. And year in, year out, we are considered among the highest ranked health plans for quality in the country. A little bit about living in Pasadena. I think when folks hear Pasadena, they think immediately about the Rose Bowl, about the Rose Parade, and I think both of those things are true. But I think for us as a freestanding institution, meaning that we're not part of a larger university system, for us it's important to be nearby other educational and scientific institutions. So we are about 1.5 miles down the street from Caltech. We're very close to the Doheny Eye Institute. So any of our students, any of you who are interested in ophthalmology research and who end up coming to our school, there is ample opportunity to engage in any number of research opportunities at some of our partner institutions. I will also highlight, and I think I said it at the beginning of the presentation, that we are very close to downtown Los Angeles, and we're also close to a whole host of hiking trails. Because we are in California, we're close to the beach, the deserts, and the ski slopes. I wanted to spend some time introducing our leadership to you. This is our founding Dean and CEO, Dr. Mark Schuster. He has been at the school for over 5 years now, and he came to us from Harvard Medical School. He too is a fellow pediatrician. I don't know whether I mentioned that I am a practicing pediatrician as well. And I will say that if you have the opportunity to read any of Dean Schuster's writings, I would encourage you to do so. He is an international leader on all things health and public policy. These are other leaders across the school, and this particular picture is a reminder for me to share with you all that our school was really built on the foundational principles of equity, inclusion, and diversity, and we believe that begins at the top. So these are folks who serve in a whole host of leadership roles. Some of us report directly to the dean, and then others are in leadership roles across other offices and departments. And I hope that you can see some level and some dimensions of diversity just looking at the photo, certainly as it pertains perhaps to gender, to race, and ethnicity. But I will say that we came to the school from a whole host of different lived experiences, different backgrounds, and different academic institutions. So I think for me, it's been an absolute privilege to serve alongside such a talented and deeply committed set of leaders. Our educational approach is also somewhat distinct. Our curriculum is built on 3 different pillars, namely biomedical science, clinical science, and health system science. And these are all integrated across teaching and learning. And I'll demonstrate a little bit of what I mean by that. So in our biomedical science pillar, this includes all of the basic sciences that are part of one's clinical and decision making. Our clinical science department focuses primarily on issues of prevention, diagnoses, and treating health conditions and disease. And then our health system science department, which by the way was the first HSS department in the country, I think there are a couple more since that time, really focuses and helps our students develop a deeper understanding of how relationships are organized in systems and how that all influences health. So students really learn quite a bit about improving health and promoting health equity. And then taking this a little bit further, our teaching and learning, it's non-lecture based. So we're a non-lecture based school. All of our learning happens in small groups, it's case-based, and there are times whereby learning happens on larger teams. Anatomy is taught without our students actively dissecting cadavers. So we don't have an anatomy lab, we have an anatomy resource center. And so in so doing, we have really leveraged technology, we've leveraged augmented and virtual reality. You'll note that the student has a pair of HoloLenses on, And he's actually interacting with a heart that's been fixed in a substance called plastinate. So there are pre-dissected organ systems, pre-dissected cadavers. And you'll also note the student was able to make a cross-section through the heart. You'll see that there's quite a bit of detail that students are able to appreciate as it pertains to the larger vessels of the heart. You'll note you can also see the musculature of the heart. And one additional thing we've added to our anatomy instruction is imaging. So the film, the radiograph that you see on that computer screen, you'll note it is exactly the same cross-section of the heart that the student engaged in virtually. We have clinical experiences pretty early in our curriculum. So our students are typically going out to the clinical settings right at about the 3rd week of medical school. And these are called longitudinal integrated clerkships. You'll hear our students refer to these as LICs. And students then start to interact with patients pretty early in their careers. And this is somewhat distinct for the school. In the first year of medical school, the students are placed either with a family medicine doctor or an internal medicine doctor, and they are placed at one of 6 Kaiser Permanente medical centers. And these are the 6 demonstrated here on the slide. And then the second year at our medical school looks like the 3rd year at other medical schools. And what I mean by that is our students complete all of their core clerkship rotations, so OBGYN, pediatrics, psychiatry, surgery, and that includes emergency medicine shifts on the weekends, primarily during the second year of medical school. And so I think in so doing, we have really, really challenged and pushed our students to do a lot of very early clinical work. And one of the reasons students are able to go out to the clinical sites that early is that once a week, for about 4 hours, we spend time not only in the classroom didactic settings, engaging in lots of clinical reasoning activities, but they're working with standardized patients in our simulation center, learning to obtain histories, perform physical examinations, etc. Just a bit about the demographics at the different medical centers that our students are placed at. And so one of the things we do as the students are getting ready to start medical school is they fill a survey out, and there are times students have an interest in serving certain populations, and we do our best to make those matches. I mentioned earlier that our school was built on the foundational principles of equity, inclusion, and diversity. What that means is that we embed EID, as it's called, throughout the school. The office is led by me, and we have an amazing team of folks who do quite a bit in that space. We are very intentional with our student recruitment efforts. We also ensure that we're embedding EID throughout the curriculum. So all of our curricula undergo what we call an EID review, meaning that we review all of the PowerPoint decks and all of the teaching and learning materials to ensure that we apply an equity lens to that work. And then, of course, we have ongoing faculty and staff development. We have a whole host of affinity and interest groups. And then, of course, we, just as we do the work through an equity lens, we try to ensure that we're also applying an anti-racism lens to the work. Service learning is important at our school. So I showed you the medical centers, the Kaiser Permanente medical centers that our students go out to on a weekly basis. And there's one Thursday per week, that's typically the clinic day, where the students are not going out to the Kaiser Permanente sites, but instead they're going out to one of 6 federally qualified health centers. And we've tried to ensure that, or we have ensured that students are matched to a health center in the exact same community as the medical center that they go out to. And we do that in very intentional ways. Every student will have a service learning project, and that particular community is the hub for that project to happen in. Just as our students have a service learning project, they also have a scholarly project, which is, you can think of that almost as a research project. We have an office for research and scholarship, and that office works to support students in their research endeavors, including matching them with faculty preceptors with whom they conduct that research. Well-being at our school, it's at the forefront of a lot of the work that we do. We have, of course, entitled Reflection, Education, Assessment, Coaching, Health, and Well-being. It stands for REACH. And students have a physician coach with whom they work. There are 6 students per coach, and they pretty much develop a 4-year relationship. This particular course, the students pause 3 to 4 times per year in 1-week blocks. And when I show you the curriculum mock-up, I will kind of show you the placement of those REACH breaks, as we call them. And then in addition to those 1-week blocks, students will have Monday sessions with their REACH coaches 5 to 6 times per year. And during that time with their coaches, what they're really doing is engaging in self-reflection, they're setting and meeting goals, and they're also reviewing their performance to date. They're learning and practicing strategies for personal well-being. They're also kind of exploring and unpacking issues centered on resilience. And all of this is with the distinct intent of developing our students' professional identity as future doctors. I should also add, there is narrative medicine that's kind of threaded throughout the school, and a lot of the reflective practices that students engage in with their coaches and even with each other in these small group classrooms, it's a lot of it is based in narrative medicine writings. This is a mock-up of kind of a typical week in the lives of our first-year medical students. I mentioned earlier that our students, we have biomedical science, clinical science, and health system science all integrated throughout, and that course is called Scientific Basis of Healthcare. And so students have small group discussions. They typically will have simulations that are based on whatever the topic or the unit they're studying. They just finished the hematology, oncology, immunology unit and had their big exam today, actually this morning. And then they're, again, doing that typically about 4 days per week, where all of those courses are integrated into one. And I mentioned that they go out to either the longitudinal integrated clerkships on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks per month, 3 Thursdays per month, and then 1 Thursday per month, they go out to those service learning healthcare or federally qualified health centers that I mentioned earlier. You see a lot here in the afternoons that are independent time, and there are a couple different ways students utilize that time. Many are involved in our student affinity groups, so some of the time is spent doing that sort of thing. Some may spend time working on their research projects, but I should point out that the educational approach and model that we use really does require a lot of that independent time, because the students are actually preparing for the next day's worth of classroom work. So you can think of our curriculum almost as a flipped classroom. They're doing a lot of pre-work in preparation for the next day, because in flipped classrooms, there is just a lot of dialogue, right? That's happening, a lot of active learning. And in order to engage in active learning in ways that are productive and helpful to the students, they need to come to class prepared. I should point out that we have 3 joint degree programs. We have the MD PhD program, and the PhD portion of the program is in partnership with Caltech. We also have 2 MD master's programs. The first is a Master's of Public Health with UCLA, and the second is a Master's of Administration with University of Southern California, USC. A bit about financial aid. This upcoming admission cycle is our final year of absolutely guaranteed tuition remission, meaning that our students are provided with full tuition and insurance scholarships. And our school also provides grant aid in order to offset some of the living costs. Living in LA is pretty expensive, as is living in Pasadena. So a little bit about our admissions process. And one of the things I thought I would do is just kind of take you through the timeline of what we think about for admissions usually during this time for students applying. Usually January through March, they're kind of thinking about the medical schools they're planning on applying to, thinking about the MCAT. April through June, students are typically taking the MCAT, beginning to work on primary applications. And then typically July through September is when students are working on various aspects of their applications, prepping for interviews, doing secondaries. October through December, students are also kind of doing a little bit of the same, starting to perhaps get admissions offers, and then January through the summer. And I bring this timeline forth for whenever folks are getting themselves ready for this, but connecting with mentors, updating school, interviewing, and then being cognizant of the Association of American Medical Colleges protocols and traffic rules. So a little bit about our admissions requirements that are specific to our school, and some you'll note are perhaps quite similar to that of other medical schools. So there are two categories here. There are prerequisite courses, and these are the courses that are required in advance of applying to our medical school. And then there are recommended courses, and you'll note a lot of the recommended courses are courses you probably would think about needing to do in order to take the MCAT. There are two recommended courses I did want to highlight here, and that is statistics and population health, epidemiology, etc. And the main reason we have these as recommended courses, you may remember that I talked about our health system science pillar or department. And in that department, you know, when we're talking about health inequities and disparities, etc., it is nice to have a somewhat of a sense of statistics and population health. And then likewise, looking at the prerequisites column, I don't think that anything here would necessarily be that surprising. I did want to highlight our humanities requirement, which can be met by way of an art course, English, history, literature, philosophy, and there are many other courses that will fulfill that particular humanities requirement. Our application requirements, we ask that students take the MCAT no earlier than 3 years in advance of matriculating to medical school. So for the 2024 cycle, that's July 1, 2021, we ask that students get their bachelor's degree from an accredited college or university in the US or Canada. And then you'll note we use the AMCAS system for our primary application. And then we have a fee of about $50 for the secondary application. As it pertains to letters, we ask that students provide us with 3 to 6 letters of recommendation. We also do accept a pre-health. If your school, for example, has a pre-health advisory committee or panel, we do accept those in lieu of the 3 to 6 letters of recommendation. Our interviews, we believe this upcoming year will again be virtual, and we have a hybrid model, which means that we do 5 multiple mini interview stations, and then we have one 29-minute traditional one-on-one interview. We do apply a holistic review, and if you look at our website, you'll note that we don't have a minimum GPA or MCAT requirement, and we really do try to remain aligned with this model, whereby we are weighing your experiences, your attributes, and your academic metrics. So we believe in assessing candidates as an individual. We believe in, as sort of reading through and hearing from our candidates in terms of their unique stories, their unique journeys, and kind of that unique distance traveled. A couple things on a more granular level in terms of some of the attributes we believe are important for you all, for our students to thrive at our school. And I mentioned that we are a non-lecture-based school, so we're really looking for students who are excellent critical thinkers. Although we've been open now for 2.5 years, we're looking for students who are mature and adaptable, who can co-create alongside us. We have student representation on just about every committee at the school. We want students who are able and want to thrive in a diverse and inclusive environment. Humility is at the core of the work we do. I mentioned that our students do have physician coaches, so having a value for coaching and of course small group learning is going to be important. Being a good team player, appreciating that early experiential curriculum, namely that you will be going out to the clinical settings pretty early in your journey at the medical school. And then lastly, I don't think this attribute of lifelong learning is necessarily unique to the school, but certainly the profession of medicine really demands that we develop, that we carry with us kind of this growth mindset, and knowing as the profession of medicine changes so rapidly that we develop a skill set to remain engaged in learning for the entirety of our careers. And then I always like to, I don't know why this has a different color blue, but I usually like to end by just providing a few tips to simplify your journey. We think that it's important for you to review the mission, the vision of each school to which you're applying. And I think that's important because when you look at websites and you kind of read through these, it's nice to see whether the school you're interested in appears to be aligned with your own personal and professional values. I think it's important to take the MCAT when you feel ready. And I think readiness looks very different to different candidates or different students. I think if you have a target score in mind that you've discussed with your mentors, for example, and you're kind of hitting those targets during your practice exams, then that may be one indication of readiness. But I don't believe that students should feel this urgency to take the exam if they're not really feeling ready at the time to take it. Give your letter writers advance notice and do ask for a strong letter of recommendation. We read a lot of letters every single year, and we think that it's really important that the person who is endorsing you is providing a strong endorsement. Once you are ready to apply, please do so early, and that allows for your application to be reviewed early. And the earlier your application gets reviewed, the more likely it is that you'll get that early interview invitation. We often hear that medical school is very competitive, and all of that is true, but your chances do go up quite a bit if, in fact, you're doing all of this stuff a bit earlier. Try to keep an updated list of your accomplishments and experiences. We know that folks do a whole lot of stuff, and sometimes it's hard if you're not cataloging it to really remember all that you've done over the course of 4 or 5, whatever number of years it is in advance of applying to medical school. So make certain you are reflecting on those experiences, and try to get letters of recommendation from folks from whom you've worked that you've listed as your most meaningful experience. And then lastly, keep your personal statement simple, keep it clear, keep it purposeful. Do ask someone to read it. And I think when folks are reading it, it really is to review grammar, to review content and flow. And I typically advise students to try to have someone who knows you fairly well read your letter of recommendation, and then also have someone who may not know you as well read it, because I think some of what you're trying to do is get a sense of whether the tone of your application seems to make sense, whether when they read it, they have kind of in a palpable way almost a sense of who you are, because you're really trying to convey a message in writing initially. So I think it is going to be important to have a few folks take a look at it. And I would also lastly like to ensure that folks are aware of our mdadmissions@kp.org email. So I see Ms. Lanier is on our call now, and we will also invite you all to engage with us by way of a Q&A. And I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see everyone or see us. Thank you.
Well, I can see people have been putting in questions into the Q&A, so make sure to put them there if you have any questions. And Madeline and I will start asking them. And to start, someone said, thank you for being here. Considering your work in DEI with the Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine, what are things that you look for in students in terms of how new students can contribute to the diversity of the school?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Agasia, do you want me to start? And then if you have anything to add, you can. Thanks for that question. So as an EID dean, and it is actually really nicely aligned with the admissions work that I do, because it allows us as both an admissions and an EID team to really kind of apply that equity lens to the work we do. And that is, I mentioned earlier about intentionality. I talked about the importance of us ensuring that we're consistently recruiting students from a whole host of backgrounds. And I think when we are recruiting students who we think would be aligned with the mission of the school, especially the EID mission of the school, and we're reviewing your portfolios, we're always looking for those kinds of experiences that you may have had as an undergrad or as a graduate student, whatever it is that whatever the path is that you're coming in from. I will say to you that, and I don't think it's a secret because these secondary application questions get posted all the time in any number of spaces, but we do have a question whereby we ask students very intentionally what they think they are going to be contributing, right, as it pertains to diversity, inclusivity, and equity at the school. So it is definitely something we prioritize. We are intentional about it. And I think there's a myth out there that people don't read essays. I can guarantee you, and Ms. Lanier, I think will attest to that as she reads applications as well, that we do read through your applications. We read them really, really carefully. And we definitely prioritize, students who have a deep understanding of equity and inclusivity issues. Ms. Lanier, anything to add?
No, that was perfect. And hi, everyone. My name is Agasia Lanier. I am one of the admission counselors for our office. So nice to see all of you, or at least hear from all of you question-wise. You summed that up perfectly. I think the only thing I would add is it's just really nice to work for an admissions office that also keeps equity, inclusion, and diversity in mind. So it is a perfect marriage of both departments, and I feel honored to kind of be able to carry that torch for EIND as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can take the next question. There was actually one question in regards to international students that I accidentally said we'll answer live, but I really meant to type that question, but I'll go ahead and take care of that now. Unfortunately, at this time, we are unable to accept international students on student visa, but that doesn't mean that won't change in the hopefully near future. More specifically, once our first class graduates, that will be something that we might be able to do very soon. So At this time, no, but that will be something coming very soon for our international students. So hold on. I know if it's next cycle, not next cycle, but coming soon.
One of our next questions is asking about the partnered institution where ophthalmology research is done. And then also, if you guys would like to expand more on the partnered institutions, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I can start with that. The Doheny Eye Institute, and it is we have somebody in charge. In fact, our department chair for biomedical sciences, Dr. Jose Varal, is the person who kind of oversees getting students connected with other institutions whereby research can happen. And I mentioned the Doheny Eye Institute, which is fairly new to the Pasadena area. They've been around, but they recently moved. And so that makes them a lot more accessible to our students. So it's just a matter of getting connected with Dr. Varal, and those connections can be made. I should also highlight that City of Hope, Huntington Memorial, those are other spaces whereby students can get connected with research mentors. In terms of partnership as institutions, Caltech, as I mentioned earlier, although they've focused primarily on the PhD portion for our MD PhD students, there are other students, if there are research opportunities that they would like to pursue at Caltech, there is opportunity for those conversations to happen. And then I think I mentioned the 2 master's degree programs with both UCLA and USC. And I guess I didn't mention what that looks like. Typically, our students would apply to those master's programs during the 3rd year of medical school. And once they're finished with 3rd year of medical school, they leave the med school, go off to the master's degree institution, say UCLA, they spend 1 year there. And the reason we've been able to condense a 2-year master's degree program into 1 year is students will get credit for some of the medical school courses. Once they're done with the master's, with their master's year, they reintegrate into Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine to finish up their final year of medical school. So I do hope that's helpful for the person who asked the question. Thank you.
Kind of along those lines of getting additional degrees, someone is asking, from the perspective of admissions committee, what are some reasons that a student might get an MPH before medical school?
Ms. Lanier, do you want to take that, or would you like me to?
I would like you to take that, since you have a little bit more with our committee.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So I think that's a really, I think that's a great question, because I'll tell you, one of the ways that question often comes to me is from students who would like to enhance their academic portfolios, and they will often ask whether they should do an MPH or should they do a post-bac program, right? And so one of the things we look at as an admissions committee is, in addition to just kind of looking through the courses at the Master's in Public Health, the MPH, is trying to develop a deeper understanding of why the students did that. I mean, it's always going to look good, right? I think that's not in any way going to hamper a student's ability, and in fact, it may enhance it. But in addition to getting the MPH, I think for students who have done so, it is nice if you are in fact able to, in some way, right, weave that into your personal statement. For example, what we often will see is students list the MPH in, or the research project they've worked on during the MPH year, and sometimes that provides the admissions committee with some understanding of why the student pursued that particular degree. But for us, I'll just say, and I think I speak on behalf of the committee to say that it is somewhat helpful when people are pretty explicit in terms of why they pursued one thing versus the other. I hope that's helpful, and if not, I'm happy to clarify.
I think that was very clear. One of the questions we have is, with the early emphasis on clerkships, they were wondering, what do students focus on during their third and fourth years? And then are they usually focusing on student service projects, or are they focusing on applying to residency?
Yeah, great question. All of the above. So during third year, that's when our students still have just a tad bit of classroom work, and it's very minimal. It's primarily centered on health system science stuff, and just a tad bit of doctoring. But usually that's kind of the year where students can go out to do global health work. We have a few students heading out to Kenya. I think 4 students from our current third year class are heading to Kenya. We have a site, a partnership in Kenya for our global health program. So global health experiences is one thing. All of our students need to do at least one rotation at an academic health center. So they're doing some of those elective and selective types of experiences. And then there are opportunities to continue to engage more deeply in a lot of community service types of opportunities. So having pushed a lot of the core clinical experiences somewhat earlier really opens up opportunities for the students. And then I said both things are happening at the same time. Students are also doing a lot of residency planning. They're completing step 1 and step 2 of the board exams. They are, thinking about where they would like to go off to get additional experiences, again, all in preparation for that big residency application, which typically will happen during the 4th year of medical school. So they're prepping for that sort of thing. So.
Thank you. And so someone kind of based on this more different schedule that Kaiser Permanente has for their medical curriculum, someone asked if that timeline changes how students prepare for taking the step 1 exam.
Yeah, happy to take that as well. We have about a 6-week study period for students, and they have a lot of support. We actually have a board exam team that really guides our students. Our Office of Academic Advising spends a lot of time with our students, ensuring that they have a solid study plans. There are a lot of check-ins with the students. There's just a lot in that space. And I'll say that we've done really, really well with our students matching, or not matching, apologies, that comes later. We hope we're going to do well there too. But we've done really well with our students taking a step 1 exam. So there's dedicated time that is reserved for our students to take step 1. I should also highlight that, and many schools do this, students have to do kind of a preparatory, for lack of a better term, step exam, and they tend to do that before they start studying for step 1, and that gives them a baseline looking at areas of strength, areas whereby they may want to spend a lot more time concentrating their energies on, and then in advance of taking the exam, they kind of repeat with some level of frequency and cadence. The mock step 1 exams or practice step 1 exams are repeated until they get to a particular score, and at that point our students are deemed ready to go off and take their step 1 exam. So I hope that's helpful.
We have a question. Does taking classes in the summer look bad to the KPSOM admissions committee?
You want to take that, Ms. Lanier?
Not at all. I mean, I think at this point, it's really just a matter of how well you do in your classes. We don't really look at when you're taking your courses. I know a lot of you sometimes actually take more classes to get ahead. Hopefully, maybe graduate a little bit earlier, maybe not, but depending on how many sciences you're taking, I know that's pretty realistic that you're going to be taking some summer courses. I remember doing that myself a long, long time ago. But no, it's not seen in any bad in any kind of way.
Thank you. And we have a couple people asking about what scholarships or what tuition will look like for people who are applying in the 2026 cycle going forward.
Yeah, I don't think we have a firm answer on that quite yet. What I will say is that we are all, I think, fully committed to ensuring that we find ways to provide strong financial support to students. We know that, you know, having had the opportunity to put forth, you know, the coverage for tuition has been incredibly impactful, right, for many of our students. We also know that for us to continue to ensure that we are, you know, recruiting students who may have a fair amount of, you know, socioeconomic challenges, may have limitations of resources, and those are definitely all important to us. So I know that we have a very persuasive dean, and he has always prioritized coverage, financial coverage and support for students. And I anticipate that these conversations will be ongoing. So I wish I had a firmer response and could say, oh, well, we have XYZ coming. But I will tell you that we are all fully committed to continuing in some way to provide support to students.
We have one question asking, there was an emphasis on the unique distance traveled, and how does the admission committee view older applicants and reapplicants? They were citing concerns about academic readiness and things like that being raised, but are there any other concerns or things that the admission committee would like to see from applicants?
Thanks for that. Ms. Lanier, would you like to take some of that, and we could tag team if you would like, or or I can take it however you prefer.
I want to tag team on this one. I mean, I'm a big fan of non-traditional students because I felt like I was a non-traditional student, so yay us. I look at it as that's your experience. You're going to highlight your experience and what you're going to bring to the table, so consider that your diversity. I also think of this as something that I'm excited about because I saw the new changes to coming to the next application cycle. Thank you, Dr. Willies-Jacobo, for sharing that with your team. I've been already talking about it. I think that's something that you can also highlight in one of the new sections as impactful experiences. So I think highlighting that, you know, you have all this experience, and yes, you are non-traditional, which means that you bring a whole host of different characteristics and things that you to the table. I think you can highlight it there. So I would say use that as your, this is me, and I got this. You know, I'm willing to be maybe even a mentor, you know, depending on the class size and who you are in that class. But I love seeing our non-traditional students interact with our traditional students. We want that diversity in our classes.
And I wholeheartedly agree with Ms. Lanier. I think that our school has done just a phenomenal job with, you know, with ensuring that we are being inclusive of students who've had a different path to medicine. I think that the most important thing on your application is going to be clear, right? Write with clarity why you're making kind of that shift in career paths. But, you know, we typically don't have a lot of, you know, conversation at the admissions committee level about older students necessarily about academic readiness. I think a lot of the questions that arise is why now? And so I've always encouraged non-traditional students to try to be as clear as possible about your journey. But I agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Lanier. I think for us, as a school, a small school, it has been nice to see how our older students, how our non-traditional students are engaging with some of our students who may have gone a route directly from undergrad, to medical school, etc. So I think clarity is the piece that's most important.
And we have another question asking about how admissions committees view community college as a way to get your prerequisites done. Is that acceptable?
Shout out to all my community college students. I love community college students. I came from a community college, Cerritos College, if you're in the house. But no, we're not looking at, community college versus your versus a four-year institution, for example, for prerequisites. Again, it really just matters on how well you did in those courses.
Nothing to add. I think there's talent everywhere, and we absolutely love our community college students.
So we have one of the questions that gets asked pretty often, which is how can you make your application stand out?
Or the secret sauce. What's
the secret sauce, as June likes to say. What's the secret sauce?
I'm making it right now. No. Ms. Lanier, did you want to take a stab at that one? And I'm happy to
I'm
tag team
gonna try, because that's the most
Okay.
common question I get too. And it's like, there's so many different answers.
let's just make it right now and tell everyone. How's that?
Right. We're making the sauce.
Okay, so starting off with mission and vision. So we're going to start, that's our first couple of ingredients. You are definitely going to look at the mission and vision of every single school that you're interested in, and you are going to make sure that you are matching that mission and vision of the schools that you're interested in. I would not want you to apply to a school where you're not, that doesn't sound like you. Why would you do that? That means that you're probably not going to be a good fit for them, and it's not going to be a good fit for you. So that's one. You're going to narrow down your choices to what is mission fit for you. Two, you're going to make sure that in your application, you're going to make sure that we know these are the ways that I feel like I meet your mission, your vision, your values. This is what I look like on paper. I want to make it known there. There are many different ways to do that. For us, our school, we value leadership. We value, lifelong learning. We value diversity. Those are big ones. So please make sure you're looking at those questions. I'm thinking about the secondary essay. Let's just, I already know it's out there. So I'll just say it. Question number 2, essay number 3. Those are big ones that you're going to definitely focus on. And then your activities, you're already doing things, right now, whether you're volunteering, you're scribing, whatever you're doing as activity-wise. But if you're passionate about something, we're going to be able to see that based on the hours that you're probably putting in and based on how you feel this experience was meaningful for you. So definitely make sure you are paying attention to that. Don't skip and skimp on those areas. Sometimes I've seen people write 2 sentences for like one, activity, and that doesn't make me feel like you're very passionate about that activity. So I feel like you need to really reflect and put the time in on those activities when you're filling them out. And I cannot say this enough. Please use that impactful experiences section in the next application, because I think that's going to be something that we're really looking at. And also, can I say this too? Social justice and advocacy is another area that is going to be added, and that's big for us too. So make sure you're reflecting well there. So I'm sorry, I said a lot, huh?
That's great. And I could not agree more with Ms. Lanier. I agree with everything said. And the only thing I'm going to add to what Ms. Lanier already said was, when you're putting together your personal statement, to me, standing out means that you're representing who you are authentically. And I've always said those stories can be similar. I have not yet read 2 identical stories, and I've been reading applications for a really, really, really long time. So try to really reflect deeply. And Ms. Lanier used the term reflect. That's going to be step number 1, right? Reflect on your journey and try to tell your story in as authentic a way and in as authentic a voice as you can, because that is going to ring true for the person reading your application. So to me, authenticity makes candidates stand out.
And also, the only thing is I was also just going to add is that people that are going to be reading your application have spent their lifetime doing these things. So, and most of them are pretty good at picking up what you've done and what you're trying to say. So I know that there's been some rumors on blogs that you shouldn't put too much social justice stuff on there because it may turn off some of the members of the committee that are quote unquote not as woke as people in our generation, which I would say some of the people that are reading, like Dr. Willie-Jacobo, she's been pre-woke, post-woke, and she's been and a lot of other folks. I'm just
understood
saying that, but just a lot of folks, because I've actually read on some of these blogs that said that to not talk about that, and so I would just say that that was just my thing.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Joven. I know that's an ongoing debate, and it's so front and center now all over the media. And to your point, it's taken over many of these pre-med sites, etc. And I think if your authentic self is about justice and equity and inclusivity, then you should write about it. That's what I mean by authenticity. So.
And we have some students asking about what clinical experiences are that you might recommend and whether medical interpreting counts as a clinical experience.
You want to take that, Ms. Lanier?
Yes. But interpreting is definitely an experience, and I think you should definitely highlight that. That's something that you may be able to use or your skills in the medical school setting. So I think that is definitely an experience. There was one other question. I know I answered it. I was typing it, but I wanted to clarify for whoever is anonymous. Hi. We're talking about the primary application and MCAT scores. So I just want to say this across the board because this is kind of confusing, but yes, I highly recommend submitting your primary application, even if you have not taken the MCAT, but you're planning to. In other words, you have the opportunity in your application to future date or let us know when you plan to take the MCAT. Most likely it wouldn't be no later than mid-September. So what will occur is we will receive your application, primary application, and we're waiting for your score. Once we receive your score, your file will be considered complete and you will be up for review. Now, if we don't have a date for you when you're planning to complete the MCAT, you could be reviewed at any time. And this is really interesting for those that may have a previous MCAT score, but you probably didn't want us to go, in other words, review you based off that score. Make sure you're future dating, because that is a big common issue that I get a lot of people emailing me about later. Of course, just a couple of reminders, if you haven't heard this already, May 2nd is when the application will open for those that are thinking about applying for the upcoming cycle. May 30th is when you can start submitting. And then actually like in late June is when we will receive applications and begin reviewing. So it's up to you. We will always go with apply when you feel ready. But I also want people to keep in mind, you are applying, the earlier you apply, the better your chances to be considered for an interview. You want to be considered among hundreds and not among thousands later on, closer to that deadline. I hope that made that clear there.
We do have one question that's related.
I'm going to put Madeline on the spot. How she's in the application process right now. How important is it to apply early and then be organized?
It's very important to apply super early as you can. If you can get your application in at the very beginning, that's what you want to do. I did not do that. So I was a couple weeks behind. And even then I felt that in my application cycle. So if people that are listening right now, if you are getting ready to apply, try to get your letters right now, try to get your personal statement try to get all of those done. We're at the end of March right now. So if you can get all of those things done and your MCAT score as well, if you can have that in as early as possible, it's good. But as Ms. Lanier was saying, if you're able to have your MCAT score in by September, you'll be good. But I did have a question for our Kaiser Permanente admissions committee. If you guys have any, there was one question about the MCAT, just how are multiple MCAT attempts seen, and are they averaged? Are the higher section scores viewed, or is the most recent MCAT score given priority?
Yeah, and
I'll leave that for our committee member.
Oh, thanks, Ms. Lanier. So I'm happy to take that. So we don't super score, meaning that we're not kind of picking off the highest scores. We take the most recent score, but we're also looking at trends, right? We are kind of looking at how students did, say, in the card section the first time versus the second time. So, and by trends, what I'm alluding to is we're hoping to find improvement. What sometimes will happen is, depending on how closely together you've taken your MCAT exams, you may or may not improve a whole lot. And sometimes it's often clear to me, or to us, to the committee, how some students may be placing a lot of their study energy into one section to make it better, ignoring another, and so that other section may dip. So I think committee members are pretty savvy in, giving grace in that way. So it is the most recent that's taken, because that gives us perhaps the best sense of where you are in terms of certainly your readiness as it pertains to what the MCAT measures.
Thank you. And we have a couple students asking about how Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine views research as an experience of applicants.
Yeah, happy to take that. We view it as, I think it is a positive thing to have research. I will say that the kind of school we are, though, and, looking at our mission, vision, and core values, and although we'd like to see for sure some amount of research experiences, it shouldn't be all of your experiences, right? We also want to ensure that we see students who are engaged in the community. So some form of community service is also important. The other thing I wanted to highlight about research is there may be institutions whereby the only research that counts perhaps is kind of wet lab research, and we're not that kind of institution. We value all kinds of different research opportunities, including, we know that, students have been engaged in things like clinical trials. Some students have been engaged in community-based or community-engaged participatory research. So our definition of research and scholarship is pretty broad. Hope that's helpful.
I can go ahead with the next question, which is if your medical school is more tailored towards internal medicine, or if there's a certain like primary care, as you mentioned, if you could expand on that.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. No, we're not really geared specifically to primary care. We know that some of our students will want to be primary care doctors, but we also know that we have students who are interested in other specialties and a lot of subspecialties like neurosurgery and dermatology, et cetera. So we're not necessarily in any way focused in on primary care versus other specialty care.
And we have one question about the anatomy without cadavers. What do you see as some of the benefits of having that sort of anatomy lab?
Yeah, great question. So I will admit, when I came to the school in 2018, and things were being built around the Anatomy Resource Center, I remember thinking to myself, anatomy without a lab. That's interesting. And then once the technology arrived and I put the HoloLenses on, I became an instant believer. I will say that it really allows you not only to engage, up close with organ systems, but it really allows you to see the anatomy pretty in just a significant amount of detail. And then the last thing I'll say is the whole concept of three-dimensionality. I think when I went to med school in 1988, I was a first-year medical student, and I still remember doing the dissection of cadavers. And that's not necessarily exactly the having a three-dimensional experience. So I think our students are going to leave the school learning all clinically relevant anatomy. And then the last thing I will say is formaldehyde doesn't smell very good. And just having that type of an experience without what feels like the toxicity of formaldehyde, I think is also a plus. Great question.
Thank you. And someone else asked if in the future Kaiser will accept more than 50 matriculants for a class.
Another wonderful question. I think I can say without doubt, yes. The question is when. Once we are fully accredited, I know that there will be, and there are already conversations of what will be the right time to increase the class size. So I know that those conversations are happening. We just don't know exactly when that's going to happen.
We have a question about letters of recommendation. And one student was saying they noticed that you were suggesting having letters of recommendation from the most significant experiences. But if there are experiences that they felt like were very significant that might not be in their most significant, is it okay to have letters of recommendation from those?
Absolutely. And just by way of reminder, the way the AMCAS is structured, you've got about 15 experiences you can list, and then you've got 3 most meaningful. And I think what ends up happening at the committee level is if students list 3 most meaningful experiences, it doesn't mean the others were not meaningful. It's just sort of highlighting those that are most meaningful. Sometimes committee members will ask kind of why a student would not have gotten a letter if the experience was that meaningful. So that was the context of in which that particular advice was provided. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and I just posted this in our chat. We have actually 3 deans of admission. April 21st, we're actually going to walk you through the AMCAS and how they view it. So if you guys have all these questions, they're going to have screenshots and examples. So hopefully you could join us.
That's great.
We have a couple questions about going back to the MPH, Masters in Public Health, and what are the benefits of having an MD and a Masters in Public Health as you become a practicing physician, and what are some of the things you can do with both those degrees?
I think another great question. So I think as medical education has really, I think, although our school is doing a really good job through our health system science department, I think we've really struggled to really meet at the intersections of of medical education and public health. And I do think that the Masters in Public Health allows our students to just really get that more on the ground experience around public health issues, especially for students who ultimately want to do a lot of leadership and advocacy work in public health spaces. So for example, if you envision becoming the medical director of a federally qualified health center, or the medical director of a Department of Public Health, I think having that public health experience can certainly enhance your opportunities to do that type of work. And it doesn't mean, by the way, I should also add that you can't do it without it, right? It just means that that experience is definitely or those opportunities may be enhanced.
We have a question about what do students think about applicants who have a PhD and are applying for their MD right now?
So just to clarify, these would be students who are finishing up their PhD program and they're applying for an MD, right? So I think just like the case whereby we ask for clarity for students who are older students or non-traditional students, I think the same would apply for somebody who is finishing up their PhD, and obviously it depends on what that PhD is in. But I think just clarifying the path to an MD program would be important to be done. So I think it definitely can be viewed favorably. It's just a matter of having a deeper understanding of that particular path.
And so we do have a question about if you have any preference for how students categorize their activities on their MCAS, and if an experience fits into many categories, is there any preference on how they choose to put it?
Did you want to take that one, Ms. Lanier, or we can also tag team? And it may be good to get some clarity too. I don't.
Yeah, I think I need some clarity on that, your question. And if it's the lead that I think it is highly, yes, I know quite a few people.
Oh, you do
on
the call.
on here, yeah.
That's funny.
She has her own fan club.
Yes, I know that. Trust me, we all know that.
Yes, they did put a little more info in the question, which was
in the question.
Yeah, they said, for example, I filmed a documentary about transgender patients with endometriosis that was comprised of film interviews with my participants. I have screened my documentary at several conferences. They say that this could fit into potential categories like artistic endeavors, research, conference presentations. And if there's any preferred way
and that's a great example, by the way. I don't think the label or the heading under which that experience is placed is going to be all that, we're going to see it nonetheless. And so I think it listening to how it was framed, I think it could go in any of those categories. So
thank you.
I think that's kind of hitting to concern among a lot of pre-med students that their applications are going to be screened out because they don't have a certain number of hours under certain sections under the MCAT. So does Kaiser do any sort of screening when it comes to hours under different categories on the AMCAS?
Great question, Madeline. We don't pre-screen for experiences. We quite literally go through each one by one. And thanks for mentioning that, because this whole concept of, how many hours is enough for any given experience comes up a lot. And what we tell folks is 100 to 150 hours in any activity over time is usually deemed as a meaningful experience. And that doesn't mean that every single thing you list is going to be 150 hours or greater. We are cognizant that some students will have, 40 hours here of shadowing, maybe 50 hours there. But every section shouldn't look like 20 here, 10 here, 5 here. And what we're trying to avoid is having the application look like a checklist, right? You're trying to put forth some impression, which we assume is reality, that some of your activities are quite sustained, right? Otherwise, the committee begins to think about it more as a checklist, like you're fulfilling this checklist to apply to med school. So that would be, I hope that's somewhat helpful. Now, the other thing medical schools across the country are cognizant of is that since COVID-19, since 2020, all of those clinical shadowing experiences, et cetera, a lot of them did not come back in the exact same ways as they were pre-2020. So I think most folks are aware that the number of hours we're now seeing on pre-med students' applications on the primary applications may be a little bit lower than we saw pre-2020. And I will say that most schools are giving grace for that, because we know that, right? We know that, getting out there and being able to shadow a physician still isn't as easy as it was pre-2020. So I did want to highlight that as well, because we know that there tends to be a lot of fretfulness around, do I have enough? Should I delay applying and that sort of thing.
Thank you. And our next question is whether it's okay to share about an emotional experience or a sad story in the body of a personal statement, as long as it transitions to more informative and less melancholic writing afterwards.
So this is from the applicant sharing out, is that right? Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things I was, alluding to when I mentioned authenticity. I mean, I think if your authentic experience that you're wanting to describe has influenced your journey, then I think it is important to write about. Now, what I do caution folks about is anything you put in your application is going to be fair game for conversation. And so if you put something, which is fine, by the way, so let me restate that is perfectly fine. It can come up in your interviews. All right. So I say that only so that folks can prep themselves, because sometimes, I think it's hard to know how you're going to react the day of an interview when you're telling or retelling an emotional story if you're asked about it. And so I just want folks to be prepared for that.
I just wanted to add to that. I actually had a similar experience when I got hired. We actually went through our own MMI process to become an admission counselor. And I remember sharing a story in regards to my mom. My mom passed away from cancer, but, I'm literally in the office and I'm writing my essay out, and I'm crying. So I'm also like, oh my goodness, is this going to look bad on me? But I was prepared to speak about it at that time. So that's something that you do have to be aware. Whatever you put in your application, it could come up in an interview. And we just want you to be aware that if it does come up, are you okay with that? Because we would never want you to feel uncomfortable in that space.
Yeah. And thanks so much, Ms. Lanier, for sharing that. And the last thing I'll say, because there are times we don't know necessarily what is going to show up for us, as Ms. Lanier mentioned, right? During the interview. And that is okay, right? There is nothing wrong with vulnerability. Okay. And I think that we don't state that out loud enough. I just want you all to be ready in the event stuff is showing up for you that you didn't really anticipate. But there is nothing wrong with vulnerability.
Thank you. I think we have a question that kind of ties into that. This is a big conversation in medicine right now, is how should applicants go about talking about more controversial topics in their personal statement, such as a previous struggle with mental health? And could this be looked down on by admissions committee? Is this something that should be disclosed? Or could this possibly raise concerns about a student's ability to succeed as a medical student, given prior struggles?
Phenomenal question. I think you should always show up authentically. And if your mental health struggles influenced and impacted your journey to the extent that you are willing to share about it, I think that's perfectly fine to share. Now, the thing I do share with applicants is sometimes it does come up at committee meetings. And one of the things, and I know Ms. Lanier comes to our committee meetings, and she's probably heard us remind folks that we don't get to utilize mental health struggles in decision making. Right? We just don't do that. And so I would say, and I can only speak for our school, and I can speak for the institution that I came from. We were very clear with committee members about not having those types of disclosures in any way impact decision making. And so it's a matter of actively reminding people that that is not part of the conversation right now. Let's and also knowing for you all, the schools that you're applying to, I think it is important to know if biases are going to show up or could show up in other schools, right? So try to get a sense of kind of the protocols and policies at your different institutions, because biases can show up. You have to keep them in check. And again, at our school, we try to ensure that we're having those conversations, I should say, at our committee meetings. The last thing I will say is, and I say this every student I mentor and advise, is share only what you're comfortable sharing, right? That's also going to be important as you're putting your own narrative together.
Thank you for that response. And so someone's asking about whether they should have I know you kind of spoke to this, but if they should have all 15 slots for the activity section filled out to make themselves more competitive, or if there's a certain minimum that they should fill.
It's a great question. I wouldn't just fill it up to get to 15. You know, I think if you only have 4, we're going to say, that's interesting. But you don't have to just, because we see that too, right? I remember seeing, I forget what, someone had 10,000 hours, I think, like as a spouse or something, or a partner, which is interesting. But it's probably not all that additive. I mean, I think you can talk about, right, being a spouse or a partner or a parent in that, but it was interesting to kind of see that quantified, and I've seen that done a couple times, and I think it more raises an eyebrow than it adds value. Not that it's not a valuable experience. It is a valuable experience, but it's interesting seeing it quantitated, right? It's like a quantification to it. So hope that's helpful.
I think that's where that impactful experience is. I'm just going to be like pressing that impactful experiences section. Right. I think that's probably where that'll come in handy, and you won't have to quantify at that point.
Yeah.
But also, I think is that some people, like I know another session was, brought up, is that going to feed the homeless once a year on Thanksgiving, I mean, that's great that you did that once a year, but it's very different than saying, hey, I help feed the homeless, but I also help with the shelter in acquiring food and preparation and planning and coordinating, distribution and all these other stuff. That means that you probably spend more than once, 3 hours once a year versus 3 hours every week or whatever. So I think those are the 15 are just not to fill them up, just to fill a spot, but they have to have like some sort of impact.
That's a great point. And that what you've just mentioned also, it speaks to your leadership. And so I think you can also, under one heading, kind of cover a whole bunch of different attributes.
There's a question that I would love to answer, and also hear Dr. Willies-Jacobo's answer, because it's going to be different. I already know. But it was from an anonymous person here. But how long do you typically look at one application? I know you're looking specifically for your mission and vision values, but is there anything else for students to maximize their chances? I think we already talked about how you can maximize your chances, but how long do we look at an application really does depend on the person. I feel like me, personally, I'm new to file reviewing for medical students or for medical pre-med students, but it takes me a good hour to look at a file. And that's because I'm
Mhm.
looking at, your letters of recommendation. I'm looking at your personal statement. I'm reading your essays. Now, someone who's more experienced may take a less amount of time because they know they've been doing this for years. But for me, it could take me an hour sometime. I think there's been a couple that have taken me more than that. But yeah, I'm a newbie.
Yeah, but you're a great reader, and I'm much quicker only because I've been doing it for so long. But I think when we talked with our file reviewers, I would say most of them are spending 30 to 45 minutes, and so I think they're really giving it a very, very good read. And so you can rest assured when you apply to our school, your application really is in fact being read. So.
Yes, it's very time consuming, and that's why they don't let you know right away, right?
Yeah.
So I know we just have a little bit more time left, but someone wanted to ask that in addition to curricular and faculty student recruitment and equity diversity, are there other ways that students at Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine are engaged in DEI issues? Perhaps something in the Pasadena area or community?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, Geisha, Miss Lanier, if you wanted to take that, or I can speak to a couple of things that students are engaged in.
I think you should start. I'm trying to figure out what I can add to that.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple different ways our students are engaged. They do a lot by way of their various student affinity groups, which, by the way, are partnered with our staff faculty affinity groups. But we also, in the Pasadena area, we partnered with a federally qualified husband, and our students are now involved with a student-run free clinic. So I think that is definitely a project that's come to fruition. It had been in the works for quite some time. So that's definitely something our students do. And then there are a whole host of initiatives and activities, be it engagement with houseless populations, etc. So there's a lot that the students who come to our school are interested and able to do. During the heart of the COVID pandemic, they were out helping out with COVID testing and vaccines and those sorts of things. So they're out and about and pretty engaged.
Yeah, and I just want to say that it's not like your community. Pasadena is actually but Pasadena is about 10 miles from Skid Row in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And so there is, people always talk about going to like areas to help the underserved. The underserved is literally your backyard, and
It's completely your backyard. Mm-hmm.
And there are places within 2 exits that are literally a different world away. And so and so there's a lot of places in your own community, so you don't need to go find somewhere else.
And let me also highlight, thanks for that, because for me, it is a reminder to also share that I think when folks think about Pasadena, they think about affluence and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of that. But in some ways, there are kind of 2 Pasadenas, right? There is also, Pasadena is a very, not very, but it is diverse. And, there are areas within Pasadena whereby I think students can do a lot of, in the context of community engagement and assessing community needs and that sort of thing. So I think when I moved to Pasadena, I had this assumption that there kind of were like no people who were resource limited, and that's couldn't be farther from the truth. So I also wanted to point that out for folks.
I know we're coming up on the end of the meeting that's supposed to end at 6:30, but we did have one question about the status of accreditation at Kaiser and how that affects current medical students at Kaiser.
Yeah. I can take that. We are as far into our accreditation as we can be. We received provisional accreditation last year, and so we are currently preparing for our final accreditation. The way accreditation works is you get preliminary to open up your school, and then once you hit kind of the 18-month or so mark, then that's when you become eligible for your provisional accreditation, which we pass with no difficulties. I think our students have been really engaged in the process because there are any number of surveys our students have to end up filling out in order to share with the accreditors how they are experiencing the space. So I think all in all, it's been a pretty positive journey for all of us, and we're excited at the prospect of getting full accreditation in 2024. So super excited about that.
Thank you. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I think, yeah, people are saying thank you in the Q&A that this was very helpful. And yes, this recording will be posted later. And thank you so much to our guests for coming and spending their time with us this Friday evening.
Thank you for having us. It's been a blast. Thanks so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone.
Have a great
Check
weekend.
out our
all.
website. Come to office hours.
Definitely.
Great plugs, Agasia. Be well.
We'll put the
Take
links in the
care.
chat box.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.